The slow dance wasn't romantic. It was a declaration of war. When Marco DeLuca's hand settled against Lena Carter's waist in front of 300 people, every dangerous man in that room understood the message. She was his now, untouchable. The problem? Lena had no idea who he was, why he'd chosen her, or that her entire life had been built on a lie her father told to stay alive. By the time she learned the truth, Marco's enemies would already be at her door, and the only man who could save her was the one her father had betrayed. If you're hooked, stay until the end. Then hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The bass thundered through the floor of Eclipse, vibrating up through Lena Carter's tired legs as she balanced another tray of premium vodka bottles toward table 12. Her feet ached in the regulation black heels, 3 sizes too small because the club only stocked standard sizes, and her narrow feet didn't qualify. 11:30 on a Saturday night meant the main floor was packed shoulder to shoulder with Manhattan's elite, hedge fund managers celebrating bonuses, tech entrepreneurs pretending old money, European tourists trying to look bored by the excess. Lena had learned to navigate it all without making eye contact. Finally, one of the men at table 12 snapped when she arrived, not looking up from his phone. "We ordered this 20 minutes ago." It had been 8 minutes. Lena knew because she'd logged the order herself, watching the bartender pour with his usual deliberate slowness while the ticket printer spat out 17 other tables' requests. But she smiled anyway, the small professional curve of lips that said, "I'm sorry," without actually apologizing, and began setting down the bottles with practiced efficiency. "Will there be anything else?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the DJ's transition into something with more synth, more urgency. "Yeah." The man finally looked up, his eyes traveling down her body with the lazy assessment of someone who'd never been told no. "Your number." Lena's smile didn't falter. "I'll send your server right over to close out your tab." She turned before he could respond, already moving toward the bar for her next pickup. This was the game. This was always the game. Deflect, redirect, keep moving. In 3 years at Eclipse, she'd perfected the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible, present enough to do her job, forgettable enough to avoid trouble. The trouble was, lately, being forgettable had become exponentially harder. "Lena, table 7 needs another round," Marcus called from behind the bar, his dark hands already reaching for the top shelf tequila. "And someone's asking for you specifically at the VIP entrance." Her stomach dropped. "Who?" "Didn't give a name. Just said to tell you it was about your brother." The tray in Lena's hand suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Her brother. Danny. Her chest constricted with the familiar cocktail of fear and hope that had become her constant companion over the past 6 months. Danny was 19, funny, brilliant, and dying. Stage 4 leukemia, the doctors had said, their voices soft with professional sympathy. Without a bone marrow transplant and aggressive treatment, maybe 6 months. With it, if they could afford it, if they could find a donor match, if a dozen other impossible things aligned, maybe years. The EFs were killing her faster than they were killing Danny. "Tell them I'll be there in 5, Lena said, forcing her voice steady as she delivered Table 7's drinks with mechanical precision. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened? Danny had been stable when she'd left for her shift, tired but joking about the hospital food, making her promise to bring him real pizza tomorrow. Had he taken a turn? Had the hospital called, unable to reach her phone in her locker? The VIP entrance was at the back of the club, past the main floor and through a hallway lined with photographs of celebrities who'd partied at Eclipse over the years. Lena barely registered them as she hurried past, her heels clicking against marble that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. The bouncer at the VIP door, a mountain of a man named Dimitri, who'd always been kind to her, stepped aside without a word, his usual smile absent. That should have been her first warning. The VIP lounge was darker than the main floor, all black leather and recessed lighting, designed for privacy and excess. Only 3 tables were occupied tonight. Lena's eyes scanned them quickly, looking for whoever had asked for her, trying to identify the crisis. "Miss Carter." The voice came from her left, smooth and quiet, somehow audible despite the muffled bass bleeding through the walls. Lena turned and found herself looking at a man she'd never seen before, which was remarkable, because he was exactly the kind of man you remembered. He sat alone in the corner booth, the shadows falling across his face in a way that seemed deliberate, as if the lighting itself knew to treat him differently. Dark hair, dark eyes, a suit that probably cost more than Danny's monthly hospital bills. He was perhaps 40, though something about the stillness in his posture suggested he could be older, younger, ageless. His hands rested on the table, no drink, no phone, nothing to occupy them. He was just waiting. "I'm sorry," Lena said carefully, her server instincts kicking in even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I think there's been a mistake. I was told someone was asking about your brother. Danny Carter, 19, patient at Mount Sinai, acute lymphoblastic leukemia." The man's voice never changed tone, each word delivered with the same quiet precision. "He was admitted 6 months ago. The doctors have given him 4 months without intervention. You work 70-hour weeks between this club and your day job at the coffee shop on Amsterdam. Your rent is 2 months overdue. You've sold everything valuable you own except your mother's wedding ring, which you keep in a safety deposit box at Chase because you're afraid you'll be desperate enough to pawn it." Lena's blood turned to ice. "Who the hell are you?" "Sit down, Miss Carter." It wasn't a request. Something in his tone, not threatening exactly, but absolute, made Lena's legs move before her brain could object. She slid into the booth across from him, her hands gripping the edge of the table to keep them from shaking. "You haven't told me who you are," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "My name is Marco DeLuca." He paused, watching her face for recognition. When none came, something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "I own this club, among other things." Lena had worked at Eclipse for 3 years and had never seen the owner. She'd assumed he was some faceless corporation or maybe a rich investor who never bothered to visit. The staff joked about him sometimes, the mysterious Mr. DeLuca who signed their paychecks but never showed his face. Some claimed he was mob-connected. Others said he was just eccentric. Everyone agreed he was powerful enough that you didn't ask questions. "Why do you know so much about my life?" Lena demanded, her fear crystallizing into anger. "Why do you know about my brother?" "Because I've been looking for your father," Marco said simply. "And 6 months ago, I found evidence that he might still be alive." The world tilted sideways. "My father is dead. He died when I was 12. Your father," Marco continued as if she hadn't spoken, "was a man named Richard Carter. He worked for me 15 years ago. He was talented, intelligent, and uniquely skilled at information acquisition and analysis. He was also a thief. When he disappeared, he took something that belonged to me, something valuable enough to be worth killing over. Your mother told everyone he died in a car accident. She took you and your infant brother and disappeared into the system. New city, new identities, new life." "That's insane," Lena whispered, but even as she said it, memories were surfacing. Her mother's paranoia about never putting photos online. The way they'd moved every few years when Lena was young. The fact that her mother had worked 3 jobs but kept them in constant motion, as if running from something. "My mother wouldn't have lied." "Your mother died protecting that lie," Marco interrupted, his voice still maddeningly calm. 5 years ago, when the cancer took her, she never told you the truth. She let you believe you were alone in the world except for your brother. But she wasn't protecting you from grief, Miss Carter. She was protecting you from me." Lena wanted to stand up, to walk away, to pretend this conversation wasn't happening, but her legs wouldn't move. "What do you want from me?" "I want to find your father, and recent evidence suggests he's been watching you." Marco's eyes held hers, dark and unreadable. "The anonymous payments toward Danny's hospital bills, the clerical error that moved him up the transplant list, the specialist who suddenly agreed to consult on his case pro bono. None of that was luck, Miss Carter. Someone with resources and connections has been intervening in your brother's care. Someone who knows exactly how desperate you are." "That's..." Lena's voice cracked. "The hospital said those payments came from a charity foundation. A foundation that doesn't exist if you dig past the paperwork." Marco pulled a slim folder from beside him on the booth and slid it across the table. "Your father is alive. He's been alive this entire time. And he's been close enough to watch you struggle while staying safely hidden." Lena's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were bank records, hospital documents, surveillance photos of a man she didn't recognize entering and leaving Mount Sinai, a man whose face was always turned away from the camera, as if he knew exactly where to look. The last page was a photocopy of an old driver's license. The face staring back at her was 15 years older, weathered by time and stress, but unmistakable. Her father. "No," she breathed. "No, this can't." The sound of breaking glass exploded from the main floor, followed by shouts. Marco's head turned sharply toward the noise, and for the first time Lana saw something shift in his expression, a flash of cold calculation that made her understand instantly why people feared him. "Dmitri," he said quietly, though the bouncer appeared in the doorway as if he'd been waiting for his name. "What's happening?" "Fight at table 12, boss. 3 guys, drunk, getting aggressive with staff." Dimitri's eyes cut to Lena. "One of them is asking for her." Lena's stomach dropped. Table 12. The man who'd asked for her number. Marco stood in one fluid motion, buttoning his suit jacket with the precision of someone preparing for battle. "Miss Carter, stay here." "I can handle drunk patrons," Lena said, standing as well, trying to reclaim some sense of control over a night that had spiraled into surreal territory. "It's part of my job." "Not anymore." Marco's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "As of this moment, you no longer work at Eclipse. You work for me." Before Lena could process that statement, he was moving toward the door, Dmitri falling into step behind him. Lena followed, her mind reeling, every instinct screaming that she should run, should get as far from Marco DeLuca and his impossible revelations as possible. But if he was telling the truth, if her father was really alive, the main floor had descended into barely controlled chaos. 2 security guards had formed a barrier around table 12, where 3 men in expensive suits were shouting about disrespect and incompetence. Lena recognized the one in the center immediately. The man who'd demanded her number, now red-faced and swaying, a broken vodka bottle in his hand. "Where is she?" he was yelling, his words slurring together. "Little bitch thought she could ignore me. I'll teach her some fucking manners." The crowd around them had formed a loose circle, phones out, capturing everything. This was the kind of scene that would be on social media within minutes, the kind of publicity Eclipse couldn't afford. Lena saw Marcus behind the bar, his face tight with worry, already reaching for the phone to call the police. Then Marco stepped into view. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The moment he entered the circle, the energy in the room shifted. The drunk man with the broken bottle fell silent mid-sentence. The security guards straightened. Even the music seemed to lower, as if the DJ had sensed the change in atmospheric pressure. "Gentlemen," Marco said quietly, his tone almost pleasant, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The drunk man's bravado flickered back to life, fueled by alcohol and stupidity. "Who the fuck are you?" "I own this establishment." Marco's hands remained in his pockets, his posture relaxed. "Which means I own your tab, your seats, and your continued presence here. You've damaged my property and threatened my employee. I'd like you to leave." "Your employee?" The man laughed, ugly and sharp. "That little nobody? I was just having fun." "She's unavailable," Marco said, and something in those 2 words made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Permanently. The drunk man's face twisted with confusion and rage. "What, she's yours? That's bullshit. I saw her first." He lunged forward, the broken bottle leading. Security moved to intercept, but Marco was faster. He sidestepped the attack with minimal effort, caught the man's wrist, and twisted. The bottle shattered against the floor. The man screamed. In 3 seconds, it was over. "You're going to leave now," Marco said, still holding the man's wrist at an angle that looked excruciating. "You're going to pay for the damages, and you're never going to return to any establishment I own, which is more of this city than you realize. Do we understand each other?" The man nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Marco released him, and security immediately moved in to escort all 3 men toward the exit. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Then Marco turned, his eyes scanning the room until they found Lena, still standing at the edge of the VIP hallway. He walked toward her with that same unhurried precision, and the crowd parted for him like water. "Come with me," he said when he reached her. "I don't—" Lena's voice failed. She tried again. "I don't understand what's happening." "You will." Marco glanced at the crowd, at the phone still recording, at the scene they'd just created. Then he did something that would haunt Lena for months afterward. He extended his hand. Dance with me. What? The DJ is already transitioning to something slower. This crowd needs to see something that makes sense to them, a narrative they can understand and share. So dance with me, Miss Carter. Let them see that you're under my protection. Let them record it and post it and talk about it, because by morning, everyone in this city who needs to know will understand that you're mine. I'm not yours, Lena whispered, but she was already placing her hand in his, already letting him lead her onto the dance floor as the music shifted into something slower, more deliberate. A jazz standard, rich with saxophone and longing. Marco's hand settled against her waist, warm through the thin fabric of her work shirt. His other hand held hers with surprising gentleness. They began to move, and Lena realized with distant shock that he was an excellent dancer, the kind of natural leading that came from practice and confidence. This is insane, she said, her voice barely audible even though his ear was inches from her lips. This is necessary. Marco's breath was warm against her temple. Your father's enemies are my enemies, Miss Carter. And now that I've made our connection public, they'll be watching you, just as I've been watching you. The difference is, I can protect you. They can only use you. Use me for what? Leverage, bait, a way to draw Richard Carter out of hiding. His hand tightened slightly on her waist. But if they believe you're under my protection, if they believe I have a personal interest in your welfare, they'll think twice before making a move. It buys us time. Time for what? To find your father before they do. To recover what he stole, to end this. Marco pulled back slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. And to save your brother's life. Lena's breath caught. What do you know about Danny's treatment? I know the specialist who agreed to consult is the best in the country. I know the transplant list doesn't move that fast naturally. And I know that whoever is helping you, whether it's your father or someone else, they have resources that exceed what any legitimate charity foundation could provide. His dark eyes searched hers. Let me match those resources, Miss Carter. Let me give you what you've been fighting for. In exchange, help me find the man who's been hiding in the shadows of your life. And if I say no, then you walk out of here tonight, and I respect that choice. But the hospital bills will come due. The specialist will move on to other cases, and your brother will die while you work yourself to death trying to save him. Marco's voice gentled, almost kind. Or you trust me, just enough to let me help. Not because you believe me, not because you like me, but because you're out of options, and I'm offering you a chance to save the person you love most. The song was ending. Around them, Lena could see phones everywhere, capturing every moment of their dance. By tomorrow, this would be everywhere. Social media, gossip sites, whispered conversations in every restaurant and club in Manhattan. The mysterious Marco DeLuca dancing with a nobody waitress. The story would write itself, and she would become part of his world whether she wanted to or not. One condition, Lena heard herself say. I need to see Danny first. I need to make sure he's okay. Then I'll listen to whatever else you have to say. Marco studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. My car is outside. We'll go now. Now? It's midnight. I own a security company. The hospital won't question my credentials. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. And visiting hours don't apply to me. He released her as the music faded, but his hand remained at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. Lena felt hundreds of eyes following them, felt the weight of attention and speculation. She'd spent 3 years being invisible. And in one dance, Marco DeLuca had made her the most visible person in the room. The night air hit her like a slap when they stepped outside, cold and sharp after the humidity of the club. A black car sat at the curb, not a limo, but something sleeker, more subtle. The driver appeared from nowhere to open the back door, his face professionally blank. Lena hesitated on the sidewalk, reality crashing back. She was about to get into a car with a man she'd met 20 minutes ago. A man who claimed to own half the city, who knew things about her life that should have been private, who just publicly claimed her as his in front of 300 witnesses. A man who might be her only chance to save Danny. Miss Carter, Marco said quietly, pausing at the car door. I realize this is a great deal to process. I realize I'm asking for trust I haven't earned, but I give you my word, you'll be safe with me tonight. Whatever you decide afterward, You'll be safe. Lena looked back at Eclipse, at the club where she'd spent 3 years in anonymous servitude, trying to be invisible enough to survive. Then she looked at Marco DeLuca, this stranger who'd pulled her from the shadows into the light, who'd offered her impossible things in exchange for the truth about a father she'd believed was dead. She got in the car. The interior was leather and luxury, climate-controlled and silent. Marco slid in beside her, maintaining a careful distance, and the driver closed the door with a soft click. The partition between the front and back seats was up, creating a private bubble. "Mount Sinai," Marco told the driver through the intercom, then turned his attention to Lena. "Tell me about your brother." "Why?" "Because in about 15 minutes, I'm going to walk into his hospital room and offer to pay for his entire treatment, donor search, transplant, aftercare, everything. It would be helpful if I knew something about him beyond his medical charts." Lena's throat tightened. "This is a trick. You don't just offer to pay for someone's cancer treatment because I want to find your father?" Marco's voice was matter-of-fact. "Miss Carter, I've spent 15 years looking for Richard Carter. 15 years, considerable resources, and more money than Danny's treatment will ever cost. If there's even a 10% chance that you're the key to finding him, then yes, I will absolutely pay for your brother's cancer treatment. It's not charity, it's an investment." "You're insane." "I'm practical." Marco pulled out his phone, typed something, then showed her the screen. It was an email to what appeared to be a hospital administrator, authorizing immediate payment of Danny Carter's outstanding balance and requesting a meeting with the chief of oncology. "This goes out the moment you give me permission. Your brother will have the best care available. You'll have time to breathe. And in exchange, you help me understand who Richard Carter was to you. What he might have told you, taught you, left behind that could lead me to him now." Lena stared at the email, her eyes burning. "I was 12 when he died. I don't remember." "You remember more than you think you do." "Memory is strange, Miss Carter. The smallest details can matter." Marco pocketed his phone. "But we don't have to do this tonight. Tonight, you see your brother. You decide if you trust me enough to accept my help. Tomorrow, we talk about your father." The car pulled up to Mount Sinai's main entrance, and the driver appeared again to open the door. Marco stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Lena. She ignored it, climbing out on her own, some stubborn part of her refusing to accept more help than absolutely necessary. The hospital lobby was nearly empty at this hour, just a tired security guard and a few scattered visitors. Marco walked directly to the elevators as if he'd been there 1,000 times. Maybe he had. Lena followed, still half convinced this was some elaborate nightmare and she'd wake up in her apartment, late for her shift. "5th floor, room 512, she said quietly as they stepped into the elevator. Marco pressed the button without comment. The doors closed, sealing them in uncomfortable silence broken only by the mechanical whir of ascent. Lena watched the numbers climb, her heart racing faster with each floor. What was she going to tell Danny? How could she explain any of this? The 5th floor was quiet, just the soft beep of monitors and the hushed voices of night shift nurses. Lena led Marco down the hallway she'd walked hundreds of times, past the rooms of other patients fighting their own battles. Room 512 was at the end, its door half open, a wedge of light spilling into the hallway. Lena paused at the threshold, listening. She could hear the steady beep of Danny's heart monitor, the whisper of his breathing. He was asleep. Relief flooded through her. "Wait here," she whispered to Marco, then slipped inside. Danny looked so young in the hospital bed, his face pale against the white pillows, his body diminished by months of treatment. He'd always been tall and lanky, all elbows and energy, but illness had whittled him down to something more fragile. Still, he was breathing, still fighting. Lena touched his hand gently, careful not to wake him. His fingers were warm, alive. "Is he your brother?" Lena turned to find Marco standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he studied Danny's sleeping form. "I told you to wait outside," she said, but there was no heat in it. She was too tired, too overwhelmed. "I wanted to see what I'm fighting for," Marco said quietly. "Who I'm protecting when I protect you." He stepped into the room, moving with that same careful silence, and stood beside her. "He looks like you. Same chin, same stubborn set to his mouth even in sleep." "He's the best person I know," Lena whispered. He's kind and funny and brilliant. He wants to be an engineer. He could have gone to MIT, but he stayed local because our mom was sick. And then her voice broke. He doesn't deserve this. No one deserves this, Marco agreed. His hand moved toward his phone. Say the word, Miss Carter. Let me help. Lena looked at her brother, at the boy who'd been her entire world since their mother died, who'd faced his diagnosis with more grace than any 19-year-old should have to possess. She thought about the bills stacking up, the calls from collection agencies, the weight of knowing she was failing him despite working herself to exhaustion. She thought about her father, alive, hidden, watching from the shadows while she drowned. Send the email, she said. Marco typed for a few seconds, then showed her the screen. The email had been sent. Confirmation came back almost immediately. Payment received, account flagged for priority review, meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Just like that. With the press of a button, the crushing weight she'd carried for 6 months lifted. Lena sank into the chair beside Danny's bed, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. What happens now? Now you go home. You sleep. Tomorrow, we meet with the doctors and discuss Danny's treatment plan. After that, Marco paused, choosing his words carefully. After that, we talk about what comes next. About your father, about the information he stole, about what it means for you to be connected to me. What did he steal? Lena asked, looking up at him. What's worth 15 years of searching? Information that could destroy empires, Marco said simply. Names, accounts, evidence of crimes that powerful men believed were buried forever. Your father was supposed to analyze it, organize it, make it useful. Instead, he copied it and disappeared. For 15 years, that information has been a loaded gun pointed at my head, at my business, at everyone connected to me. I need it back. And if we find my father? If we get this information back, what happens to him? Marco met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something almost like regret in his expression. That depends on him, Miss Carter, on whether he's willing to cooperate, on whether he's spent 15 years running from consequences or planning his next move. He paused. But I promise you this. Whatever happens, I won't let it touch Danny. Your brother's treatment continues regardless of what your father has done. That's not negotiable. It wasn't quite trust, what Lena felt then. It was more like recognition, the understanding that Marco DeLuca was dangerous and powerful and ruthless, but he was also, in his own calculating way, honest. He'd told her the cost up front. He'd shown her the cage before inviting her inside. And she'd walked in anyway because the alternative was watching Danny die. There's a car waiting downstairs to take you home, Marco said, checking his phone. The driver will wait until you're safely inside your apartment. Tomorrow, a different car will pick you up at 8 a.m. for the hospital meeting. After that, we hunt for my father, Lena finished. I understand. Do you? Marco studied her face. Because once we start this, once you're publicly connected to me, there's no going back to invisibility. The dance we shared tonight will be on every gossip site by morning. Your name, your face, your connection to me, it all becomes public record. Some people will resent you for it. Others will try to use you because of it, and some, his jaw tightened, some will try to hurt you to hurt me. Then why did you dance with me? Lena demanded. Why make it public? Because your father's enemies were already watching you. Because making you visible to my world makes you safer than leaving you in the shadows, where anyone could reach you unnoticed. Marco's voice softened slightly. I realize that's a paradox, protecting you by exposing you. But in my world, Miss Carter, the only thing more dangerous than being seen is being alone. Lena wanted to argue, to find the flaw in his logic, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves. It was almost 2 a.m. She'd been awake since 5 a.m., had worked 10 hours at the coffee shop and 6 at Eclipse, and had just had her entire understanding of her life overturned. I need to go, she said, standing. I need to process all of this. Of course. Marco stepped back, giving her space. The car is a black sedan, license plate ending in 4747. The driver's name is Anthony. He's been with me for 10 years. You can trust him. Lena nodded, too tired to question how many people Marco DeLuca employed, how deep his organization ran. She bent to kiss Danny's forehead gently, whispering a promise to return in the morning, then walked toward the door. Miss Carter, Marco said as she reached the threshold. She turned back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry your mother felt she had to lie to protect you. I'm sorry your father put you in this position. And I'm sorry that our meeting happened this way, with leverage and desperation instead of choice. But I meant what I said. You're under my protection now. That's not a transaction. It's a fact. Lena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just walked away, down the quiet hospital corridor, into the elevator, through the lobby, and out into the cold night air, where Anthony was indeed waiting beside a black sedan. The drive home passed in a blur. Lena stared out the window at the city sliding past. The same street she'd walked for years, now somehow foreign. When they reached her building, a modest walk-up in a neighborhood that was gentrifying just slowly enough to still be affordable, Anthony opened her door and waited until she was safely inside before driving away. Lena climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, unlocked the 4 locks on her door — the landlord had installed 2, she'd added 2 more — and stepped into her small, shabby sanctuary. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom with temperamental plumbing. Home. She kicked off her heels, peeled off her work clothes, and stood in the shower until the hot water ran cold. Then she dried off, put on her oldest, softest pajamas, and sat on her bed with her phone. The dance was already everywhere. Hashtag Eclipse NYC. Hashtag Marco DeLuca. Hashtag Mystery Woman. The photos showed her in Marco's arms, her face visible, his expression unreadable. The comments ranged from curious to catty to outright vicious. Some people were digging, trying to find out who she was. Others were already speculating about affairs, sugar daddy arrangements, mob connections. Lena Carter, invisible waitress, had become Lena Carter, subject of Manhattan's gossip machine, in the space of 1 dance. She turned off her phone and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in this city, her father was alive, hiding, watching. Somewhere, Marco DeLuca's enemies were learning about her existence, calculating her value as leverage. Somewhere, Danny slept peacefully, unaware that his treatment was about to be fully funded by a man who wielded power like a weapon. And tomorrow, Lena would walk back into Mount Sinai and make a deal with the devil to save the angel sleeping in room 512. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her. The last thing she thought before sleep took her was the memory of Marco's hand against her waist, warm and steady, as he'd whispered in her ear, "You're mine now." Not a question, not a request, a promise. Lena woke to sunlight slicing through her cheap curtains and the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand like an angry wasp. She'd forgotten to silence it before falling asleep, and now it buzzed with notifications, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Text messages from coworkers at Eclipse asking if she was okay. Missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Social media alerts that she didn't have the courage to open yet. She silenced the phone and checked the time. 7:15. The car would arrive in 45 minutes. The reality of last night crashed over her in waves. Marco DeLuca. The dance. The impossible revelations about her father. The email that had erased Danny's medical debt with a single keystroke. She sat up slowly, her body aching from tension she'd carried through her sleep, and tried to convince herself it had all been real. The confirmation email on her phone proved it was. Mount Sinai Medical Center had sent an automated message at 2:47 a.m. acknowledging full payment of Daniel Carter's account and noting a scheduled consultation with Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief of Oncology, at 9 a.m. today. Patient family member requested to attend. Lena Carter. She showered quickly, her mind racing through everything Marco had told her. Her father was alive. He'd stolen something dangerous. He'd been close enough to manipulate Danny's treatment, but hadn't revealed himself. Every piece of information felt like a puzzle piece from a different puzzle, refusing to form a coherent picture. Lena dressed carefully, choosing the only professional outfit she owned, gray slacks and a navy blouse she'd bought for her mother's funeral 5 years ago. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now her face was probably on a dozen gossip websites, attached to speculation and rumors she couldn't control. The thought made her stomach turn. At exactly 8 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Anthony outside, black sedan." Lena grabbed her bag and headed downstairs, her heart hammering. The morning was cold and bright. The kind of October day that promised autumn was finally taking hold. The black sedan idled at the curb and Anthony stepped out to open the door. A man in his 50s with kind eyes and the build of someone who'd spent time in the military. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying a faint Brooklyn accent. "Sleep well?" "Not really," Lena admitted, sliding into the back seat. "Understandable." Anthony closed her door and returned to the driver's seat. "Mr. DeLuca wanted me to tell you he'll meet you at the hospital. He's been in meetings since 6, but should arrive before the doctor." "Meetings about what?" Anthony's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, something like sympathy in his expression. "That's not my place to say, miss. But if I were guessing, I'd say he's making arrangements to keep you safe." The drive to Mount Sinai took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Lena spent it staring out the window, watching the city wake up. Dog walkers, coffee shops opening, students hurrying towards subway entrances. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that Lena's entire existence had shifted on its axis. When they arrived, Anthony escorted her through the main entrance and directly to the elevator, bypassing the reception desk entirely. Apparently, Marco's influence extended to hospital protocol. They rode to the 5th floor in silence, and when the doors opened, Lena saw him immediately. Marco stood outside Danny's room talking to a woman in a white coat, Dr. Chen, presumably. He'd changed since last night, now wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent. But his posture was the same, controlled, alert, radiating quiet authority. When he saw Lena approach, he nodded to the doctor and turned his attention fully to her. "Miss Carter? Good morning." "Is he awake?" Lena asked, nodding toward Danny's room. "He is. I spoke with him briefly." Marco's expression gave nothing away. "He has questions." "I imagine he does." Lena's chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm a friend who wants to help, nothing more. I thought you should be the one to explain the rest." Dr. Chen stepped forward, extending her hand. "Miss Carter, I'm Sarah Chen. I've been reviewing your brother's case this morning, Mr. DeLuca has authorized comprehensive treatment, and I have to say, the timing is remarkable. We've just identified a potential donor match through the registry, a development that frankly seemed unlikely even a week ago." Lena shook the doctor's hand, trying to process the words. "A donor match? Already?" "The search was expedited due to some recent interventions." Dr. Chen's glance toward Marco was brief but meaningful. "We'll need to run confirmatory tests, but if the match holds, we could schedule the transplant within 3 weeks. Your brother's current condition is stable enough for the procedure." 3 weeks. After 6 months of watching Danny deteriorate, after endless nights of hopeless calculations and impossible choices, suddenly there was a timeline. A real chance. "What does he need to do?" Lena asked, her voice barely steady. "Right now, rest and maintain his strength. We'll start a modified prep regimen next week." Dr. Chen smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "This is good news, Miss Carter, really good news. Your brother is young and otherwise healthy. His prognosis is excellent." Lena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Dr. Chen excused herself to check on other patients, leaving Lena alone in the hallway with Marco. "Thank you," Lena managed finally. "I don't know how you did this or what it cost, but thank you." "We had an agreement," Marco said simply. "I keep my promises." He paused, studying her face. "Are you ready to see him? Is he angry? Confused? He's 19 and just learned that a stranger is paying for his treatment. I'd say confused is an understatement." Marco's expression softened slightly. "But he's also your brother. He trusts you. Tell him whatever you think he needs to hear." Lena took a deep breath and pushed open the door to room 512. Danny was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than he had in weeks, or maybe that was just hope making him seem more solid. His dark hair was rumpled from sleep, and he'd pushed aside the breakfast tray the hospital had delivered, barely touched. When he saw Lena, relief flooded his face. "Lena, what the hell is going on?" She crossed to his bed and took his hand, squeezing tight. "How are you feeling?" "Don't deflect. Some guy in a suit worth more than our apartment just told me that all my medical bills are paid and I have a donor match and everything's going to be fine. Who is he? Why is he helping us?" Danny's eyes searched hers, sharp despite the illness. "And why does he look at you like he owns you?" "He doesn't own me," Lena said automatically. then wondered if that was actually true. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. Lena sat on the edge of his bed, still holding his hand, and tried to figure out where to start. How did you tell your dying brother that your dead father wasn't actually dead? That a powerful man had entered your life offering salvation in exchange for hunting ghosts? "Do you remember Dad?" she asked quietly. Danny's expression flickered with surprise. "Dad? Lena, what does... He died when I was a baby. You know I don't remember him. What if he didn't die? What if Mom lied to protect us?" The confusion on Danny's face shifted to something harder. "What are you talking about?" So Lena told him. Not everything. She left out the parts about stolen information and 15-year manhunts, but enough. She told him that Marco DeLuca believed their father was alive, that he'd been searching for him, that the recent interventions in Danny's care might have been their father's doing. She told him about the deal she'd made, help find their father in exchange for Danny's treatment. Danny listened without interrupting, his hand tightening around hers as the story unfolded. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So this Marco guy," he said finally, "he's using you as bait." "It's not like that, isn't it?" Danny's voice was sharp. "Lena, you just told me that Dad, if he's even alive, has been hiding for years, and now this stranger wants to use you to flush him out. How is that not bait?" "Because Marco is also giving you a chance to live," Lena said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "Danny, we were out of options. The bills were crushing me. You needed treatment we couldn't afford. If there's even a chance this helps, I don't want you sacrificing yourself for me." Danny's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'd rather die than have you become some mob boss's property." "He's not..." Lena stopped because she didn't actually know what Marco was. "He gave me a choice. He's keeping his promises. And right now, he's the reason you have a donor match and a real shot at beating this." "At what cost to you?" Lena didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, she didn't know yet what the full cost would be. She only knew that watching Danny die had been slowly killing her, and Marco had offered a lifeline when she was drowning. "I can handle this," she said instead. "I just need you to focus on getting better. Let me worry about everything else." "You always say that," Danny's voice cracked. "You've been worrying about everything else since Mom died. When do you get to stop carrying all of it?" "When you're healthy," Lena said firmly. "When you're in remission and back in school and living your life. That's when I get to stop." But Danny pulled her into a hug, careful of his IV lines, and Lena felt him shaking against her. They stayed like that for a long moment, two people who'd been each other's entire world for 5 years, facing an impossible situation with nothing but each other to hold on to. "If this Marco guy hurts you," Danny whispered against her hair, "donor match or not, I'll kill him myself." Lena laughed, the sound choked with tears. "Deal." When she finally pulled back, Danny's expression was serious. "I want to meet him. Actually meet him, not just have him show up and make promises." "Okay," Lena agreed. "I'll ask." She found Marco exactly where she'd left him, standing in the hallway with his phone, issuing quiet instructions to someone about security protocols and background checks. He ended the call when he saw her approach. "How is he?" "Scared, angry, protective." Lena crossed her arms. "He wants to meet you properly." "Of course." Marco pocketed his phone. "Now?" "Now." They entered the room together, and Lena watched Danny's expression shift as he took in Marco's full presence. There was something about Marco that the doorway couldn't quite contain, an intensity that filled whatever space he occupied. "Danny Carter," Marco said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you looking stronger." Danny shook his hand warily. "You're the guy who's paying for my treatment." "I am." "Why?" "Because your sister agreed to help me find someone I've been looking for, and because I keep my word when I make a deal." Marco's directness seemed to surprise Danny. "I realize this situation is unusual. You have every right to be suspicious." "Suspicious doesn't begin to cover it." Danny glanced at Lena, then back to Marco. "What happens when you find our father, assuming he's even alive?" "That depends on whether he cooperates." Marco's voice was matter of fact. "I need to recover something he took from me 15 years ago. If he returns it and provides information about where it's been, we can reach an arrangement. If he refuses," he paused, Then things become more complicated. And Lena, what happens to her when this is over? She remains under my protection as long as she wants it. Marco met Danny's eyes steadily. Your sister entered into this agreement to save your life. That was her choice, and I respect it. When you're in remission and this situation with your father is resolved, she'll be free to walk away if she chooses. But she'll always have my protection, because once you're under my care, that doesn't expire. Danny studied Marco for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone less honest about being dangerous. Danny's laugh was bitter. At least you're not pretending to be a good guy. I'm not a good guy, Marco agreed. But I'm a man of my word. Your treatment continues regardless of what happens with your father. That's not conditional. It's a fact. Something in Danny's posture relaxed slightly. Okay, I can work with that. He looked at Lena. But I want updates. Every step of whatever this is. I don't want you dealing with this alone. You focus on getting better, Lena said. That's the deal. That's your deal with him. My deal with you is that you don't shut me out. Danny's jaw set stubbornly. I'm sick, Lena. I'm not helpless. And I'm not a child. So don't treat me like one. Marco's phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Miss Carter, we need to leave soon. There's someone who wants to meet you. Who? Someone with information about your father. Marco typed a quick response, then pocketed the phone. We have a meeting in 40 minutes across town. Lena's heart jumped. What kind of information? The kind that might tell us where he's been hiding. Marco moved toward the door, then paused. Danny, your sister will be safe with me. You have my word. Your word better be worth something, Danny said quietly. It is. Marco's gaze was steady. It's the only thing in this world that is. Lena kissed Danny's forehead, promised to call him later, and followed Marco out into the hallway. Anthony was waiting by the elevator, and the three of them rode down in tense silence. When they reached the car, Marco held the door for her, and Lena slid inside, her mind racing. Who are we meeting? She asked as the car pulled into traffic. A man named Victor Constantine. He runs an import-export business that operates in the gray areas of international commerce. Marco's tone suggested those gray areas were actually quite black. He's also someone who knew your father 15 years ago. They worked together briefly before your father disappeared. And he's willing to talk to you now, after 15 years? Victor owes me a significant favor. I'm calling it in. Marco's expression was unreadable. He claims he saw your father 3 months ago, at a shipping facility in Red Hook. Lena's breath caught. 3 months ago? That's recent. That's right around the time the anonymous payments started appearing in Danny's hospital account, Marco finished, which suggests your father has been more active in your life than we initially thought. The drive to Red Hook took them through neighborhoods Lena barely recognized, industrial areas giving way to converted warehouses and expensive waterfront developments. The car finally stopped outside a nondescript building with minimal signage, just an address painted on rusted metal. Stay close to me, Marco said as Anthony opened the door. Victor is an ally, but he's also an opportunist. Don't volunteer information. Let me do the talking. They entered through a side door that led into a warehouse space that had been partially converted into offices. The main floor was stacked with shipping containers and wooden crates, but a glass-walled office overlooked everything from a second-floor mezzanine. A man stood at the railing watching their approach. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair, and the kind of face that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Marco, Victor called down, his accent thick, Russian, maybe Ukrainian. You actually brought her, I'm impressed. Victor, Marco's voice carried a warning. We had an agreement. Yes. Come up. Let's talk civilized. They climbed the metal stairs to the office, where Victor waited with vodka already poured into 3 glasses. The space was surprisingly refined, leather furniture, expensive art that was probably stolen, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Miss Carter, Victor said, his eyes traveling over her with frank assessment. You look like your father. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. Richard was always stubborn. You knew him well? Lena asked, ignoring Marco's instruction to stay quiet. Well enough to know when a man is running scared. Victor handed her a glass of vodka. Drink. We toast to reunion, yes? We're not here for toasts, Marco said sharply. You told me you saw Richard Carter 3 months ago. I need details. Victor's smile didn't fade, but something cold entered his eyes. Always business with you, Marco. This is why you have no friends. He settled into a leather chair, gesturing for them to sit. Yes, I saw Richard. He came to me asking for transportation. Documents for someone small, young, medical records, I think. Lena's hand tightened around the vodka glass. Medical records for my brother. Perhaps. He didn't say, but he paid well. Cash, very clean, and I arranged what he needed. I also told him he was being stupid coming out of hiding after so long, but Richard never listened to good advice. Victor took a long drink. He asked about you, Miss Carter. Wanted to know if you were safe, if you were working, if anyone had bothered you. I told him I didn't know you. This was truth at the time. Did he say where he was staying? Marco's voice was controlled, but Lena could hear the tension beneath it. Where we could find him. He said he was staying nowhere. Always moving, but... Victor paused, swirling his vodka. He mentioned a place, old storage facility in Queens, near the rail yards. Said he kept things there. Important things. Marco leaned forward. Which facility? That information, my friend, is worth more than the favor you're calling in. Victor's smile was shark-like now. I give you this. We are even, plus you owe me something extra, something valuable. Name your price. I want priority access to your port operations for 6 months. No questions about what I ship or where it goes. No. Marco's response was immediate. Pick something else. That is my price. Victor's eyes glittered. Take it or leave it. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Lena watched the two men stare at each other, recognizing a negotiation that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with power. 3 months, Marco said finally, and I get veto power on anything that endangers my other operations. 4 months, no veto, but I give you manifest lists in advance. Done. Marco extended his hand and Victor shook it. The facility? Victor pulled out his phone, typed something, and showed Marco the screen. Address and access codes. The facility is abandoned officially, but Richard paid the owner under the table to keep it operational. I arranged the connection. Marco photographed the screen with his own phone, then stood. If you're lying to me, Victor, I'm not stupid enough to lie to you about this. Victor rose as well. Besides, I want you to find Richard Carter almost as much as you do. He owes me money from 15 years ago. If you locate him, I expect a cut of whatever you recover. We'll see, Marco said, which wasn't agreement or refusal. He turned to Lena. We're leaving. Lena set down her untouched vodka and followed Marco out of the office, down the stairs and back to the waiting car. Once they were inside with the privacy partition up, she turned to him. Are we going there now? To the storage facility? No, not yet. Marco was already on his phone, typing rapid-fire instructions. First, I'm taking you somewhere safe while I have the location surveilled. If your father is using that facility, I don't want to spook him by rushing in. And if it's a trap set by who? By anyone who knows your father has information worth killing for. Marco finished typing and looked at her directly. Miss Carter, you need to understand something. The moment Victor saw you with me, word started spreading. By tonight, everyone in my world will know that I've connected myself to Richard Carter's daughter. Some will see that as a vulnerability. Others will see it as an opportunity. Opportunity for what? To use you against me, or against your father, or both. Marco's expression was grim, which is why you're not going back to your apartment. You're staying somewhere I can protect you properly. I have a job. I have responsibilities. You quit Eclipse last night. Your day job at the coffee shop will receive notice this afternoon that you're no longer available due to a family emergency. Your landlord will receive 3 months' rent in advance, with a note explaining you've had to relocate temporarily for your brother's treatment. Marco's tone left no room for argument. I'm not asking your permission, Miss Carter. I'm telling you how this works now. Anger flared hot in Lena's chest. You can't just rearrange my entire life. I can, and I am. Because the alternative is coming home to find someone waiting in your apartment who wants to use you as leverage, or having your brother's hospital room visited by people who aren't concerned with his recovery. Marco's voice was hard now, the careful politeness stripped away. I promised you protection. This is what protection looks like. It's not convenient, it's not comfortable, but it keeps you alive. Lena wanted to argue, to demand her autonomy back, to refuse this wholesale takeover of her existence. But the cold logic of his words settled over her like ice water. She'd seen what Marco could do with a phone call, how his influence reached into hospitals and warehouses and probably a dozen other places she hadn't discovered yet. If he had that kind of power, what kind of power did his enemies have? "Where am I staying?" she asked quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "My building. I own a residential tower in Tribeca. The top 3 floors are mine. You'll have your own apartment on the floor below my penthouse. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, everything you need. There's security on every floor, cameras on every entrance, and a team who will accompany you if you need to go anywhere. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected." Marco's expression softened slightly. "I realize the distinction feels academic right now, but Miss Carter, Lena, I need you to trust that I'm trying to keep you safe. Not controlled, safe." The use of her first name surprised her. It was the first time he'd used it, and something about the way he said it made her feel less like a chess piece and more like a person. "Can I see Danny whenever I want?" she asked. "Yes, with security. Can I bring him things? Books? Food? Whatever he needs?" "Yes." "Can I tell him where I'm staying?" Marco hesitated. "The less people who know your exact location, the safer you are. Even Danny. He's my brother, which makes him a vulnerability that others will exploit if they think it will get to you, or through you to your father." Marco's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not trying to isolate you. I'm trying to keep both of you alive long enough to resolve this situation." The car pulled up outside a gleaming tower of steel and glass, all modern architecture and expensive taste. A doorman appeared immediately to open Lena's door, and Marco guided her through a lobby that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel, not a residential building. They rode a private elevator to the 32nd floor, where Marco unlocked a door and gestured for her to enter. The apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, hardwood floors, furniture that managed to be both stylish and comfortable. It was also clearly staged for her arrival. Fresh flowers on the dining table, a laptop set up on the desk, groceries already stocked in the kitchen. "How long have you been planning this?" Lena asked, running her hand along the back of the couch. "Since last night, after you agreed to help me." Marco moved to the window, looking out at the city below. "I had people working through the night to make this ready. Your clothes from your apartment will arrive this afternoon, along with anything else you might need. If there's something missing, tell the concierge." This must have cost a fortune. The apartment was already mine. The preparation was just logistics. Marco turned back to face her. "I meant what I said, Lena. You're not my prisoner, but you are in danger whether you fully understand that yet or not. So please, stay here. Let me handle the surveillance of the storage facility. Let my team do their jobs. And when we have actionable information about your father, we'll move together." Lena walked to the window and looked out at Manhattan spreading below her like a glittering promise. Somewhere in this city, her father was hiding, carrying secrets that men like Marco and Victor and others she hadn't met yet would kill to possess. Somewhere, Danny was fighting for his life, with treatment that only existed because she'd made a deal with a man who wielded power like a scalpel. And here she stood, in a beautiful cage waiting for the next move in a game she barely understood. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long until we know if the storage facility leads somewhere?" 24 hours for initial surveillance. 48 to establish patterns." Marco checked his watch. "I have a meeting in an hour that I can't miss. Anthony will stay on this floor. If you need anything, call him. My direct number is programmed into the phone on the desk." And then what? After 48 hours? "Then we decide whether to approach the facility directly or wait for your father to show himself." Marco moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think he will show himself. I think he's been watching you long enough that he knows what's happening. And I think the fact that I've claimed you publicly will force his hand." "Claimed me," Lena repeated, the words bitter on her tongue. "Protected you," Marco corrected. "The dance last night, bringing you here, making our connection visible, it's all designed to draw him out. If your father cares about you at all, he won't be able to stay hidden while you're in the crosshairs. So I am bait. You're the catalyst. Marco's dark eyes held hers. There's a difference. He left before she could ask what that difference was. The door closing behind him with a soft click. Lena stood alone in the expensive apartment, surrounded by luxury she'd never imagined occupying, and felt the full weight of her choices settling onto her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "You okay?" She typed back. "Yes, staying somewhere safe. I'll visit tomorrow." His response came immediately. "Promise?" "Promise." Lena set down the phone and sank onto the couch, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. In 24 hours, she'd gone from invisible waitress to the center of a dangerous game involving her supposedly dead father, stolen secrets, and a man who commanded this city like a kingdom. She should have been terrified. The strange thing was, beneath the fear and anger and confusion, there was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. Because for the first time in 6 months, Danny had a real chance at survival. And for the first time in her life, Lena had someone willing to fight beside her instead of expecting her to fight alone. Even if that someone was Marco DeLuca, with his cold calculations and dangerous world. Even if the price of his help was her freedom. Even if she was starting to suspect that the real danger wasn't the enemies circling in the shadows, but the way her pulse quickened when Marco said her name. The 48 hours crawled past like broken glass dragging across skin. Lena spent the first day exploring the boundaries of her gilded cage, learning that the apartment had everything except the one thing she actually wanted, freedom to leave without an armed escort. Anthony remained stationed outside her door with professional courtesy and immovable resolve. When she tested the limits by announcing she was going for a walk, he'd simply nodded and called for 2 additional security personnel to accompany her. She'd gone back inside. The second day, she visited Danny with Marco's team flanking her like shadows. Her brother had looked stronger, the color returning to his face as the new treatment protocol began working its quiet miracle. But his eyes had been sharp when he'd studied the men waiting in the hallway, and sharper still when he'd asked Lena if she was okay. She'd lied and said yes, because the truth was too complicated and he needed to focus on healing, not on the fact that his sister had traded one kind of prison for another. On the third morning, Marco's call came at 6 a.m. "We have movement at the facility," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the edge of controlled urgency. "Someone accessed the storage unit at 4:30 this morning. Male approximately 5'10", moving carefully. The surveillance team couldn't get a clear facial, but the gait matches historical footage of your father." Lena sat up in bed, her heart immediately racing. "Is he still there?" "No, he was inside for 40 minutes, then left on foot. We tracked him to a subway station but lost him in the crowd." Marco paused, and Lena heard voices in the background, orders being issued in clipped tones. "But he left something behind, a package, deliberately placed where cameras would see it. I'm sending a team in now to retrieve it. I want to be there." "Lena, you said I wasn't a prisoner. You said when there was actionable information, we'd move together." Her voice was steel now, forged from 3 days of waiting and worrying. "He's my father. If he left something, I deserve to see it firsthand." The silence stretched long enough that Lena thought Marco might refuse. Then, "Anthony will bring you to the facility. Wear something you can move in. We leave in 20 minutes. The storage facility in Queens looked exactly like the kind of place you'd hide secrets. A sprawling complex of corrugated metal units surrounded by chain-link fence, tucked between rail yards and abandoned warehouses. Dawn was just breaking when they arrived, painting everything in shades of gray and amber. Marco's people had already secured the perimeter, dark-suited figures positioned at strategic points, their presence transforming the area into something that felt military. Marco met her at the entrance to Unit 247, his expression unreadable in the early light. He'd ditched the expensive suit for tactical clothing that made him look dangerous in a different way. Lean and ready, a predator in his natural element. "The package is inside," he said, gesturing to the open unit. "We haven't touched it. I wanted you to see everything in context." Lena stepped into the storage unit and stopped, her breath catching. The space was small, maybe 10 by 10, and nearly empty except for a metal shelf along one wall. On the shelf sat a single cardboard box, unremarkable except for what was written on top in black marker. For Lena. Her name. In handwriting she recognized from old birthday cards and a handful of letters her mother had kept in a shoebox. her father's handwriting. "It's not booby-trapped," Marco said quietly from behind her. "We scanned it. Just paper inside, some photographs, and what appears to be a flash drive." Lena approached the box slowly, her hands trembling as she reached for it. The cardboard was cheap, the kind you'd pick up at any moving supply store, but it had been sealed carefully with packing tape. She tore through the tape and opened the flaps. Inside, exactly as Marco had said, papers, photographs, and a small flash drive in a plastic case. The photographs came out first. Lena's hand shook as she shuffled through them. Her mother, young and laughing, standing in front of a house Lena didn't recognize. Lena herself at maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning on a swing set. Danny as a newborn, tiny and red-faced in their mother's arms. And then, her breath stopped. A family photo she'd never seen before. Her mother, her father, and young Lena between them, all three smiling at the camera like they had a future, like they were going to be okay. "When was this taken?" Marco asked, looking over her shoulder. "I don't know. Before—" Lena's voice cracked. "Before he left. Before everything fell apart." Beneath the photographs were letters, dozens of them, written on notebook paper in her father's careful script, each one dated. Lena scanned the dates and felt her stomach drop. They spanned 15 years, one for every birthday she'd had since he'd disappeared, one for every Christmas. Several marked simply with dates and the notation, difficult day, or milestone. "He's been writing to you," Marco said, and something in his voice suggested this surprised him. "All this time." Lena opened the first letter with shaking hands. The date at the top read 2 weeks after her 12th birthday, right around when her mother had told her that her father had died in a car accident. "My dearest Lena," it began, "today you turned 12, and I wasn't there to see it. I will never forgive myself for that. Your mother has probably told you I'm dead by now. We agreed it was safer that way, safer for you and Danny if everyone believed I was gone. But I need you to know the truth, even if you won't read this for years, even if you never read it at all." The letter continued, explaining in careful detail what had happened. How Richard Carter had worked for Marco DeLuca as an information analyst. How he'd discovered something in the data he was processing. Evidence of corruption that reached into law enforcement, into city government, into places that should have been clean. How he'd made copies because he'd been afraid someone would destroy the evidence. How that decision had made him a target for people more dangerous than Marco, people who wanted those secrets buried forever. "I thought I could use the information to protect us," the letter read. "I thought if I had leverage, they couldn't touch my family. I was wrong. The moment I made those copies, I put a target on your back, on your mother's back, on baby Danny. So I did the only thing I could do. I disappeared. I made Marco DeLuca believe I'd betrayed him by stealing his property. I made everyone else believe I'd died. And I've spent every day since trying to keep you safe from a distance." Lena lowered the letter, her vision blurring with tears. "He didn't steal from you," she said to Marco, her voice raw. "He was trying to protect evidence. He was trying to do the right thing that put my operations under scrutiny for 15 years, Marco said, but his tone lacked its usual edge. The right thing that made me look weak to my enemies. The right thing that forced me to hunt him across the country." He paused. "But if what he's saying is true, if the information he took implicates people beyond my organization, that changes things." "Does it?" Lena looked up at him, anger cutting through the grief. "Does it change the fact that you've been hunting him like an animal? That you used me to flush him out?" "It changes the nature of the threat," Marco said carefully. "And it means your father and I might have a common enemy." He gestured to the flash drive. "We need to see what's on that." Lena picked up the drive with numb fingers. Attached to it was a note in her father's handwriting. "Everything is here. Names, dates, account numbers, recordings. 15 years of insurance. But insurance only works if someone knows how to use it. Show this to DeLuca. Tell him I'm sorry for what I took, but not sorry for why. And tell him we need to talk face to face, because the people who wanted me dead then want both of you dead now. They know he's connected to you. They know I'll come out of hiding for you. We're all targets now. The difference is, together we might survive. RC." Marco read the note over her shoulder, his expression darkening. "He's right. Whoever these people are, connecting you to me has made you a priority target. And if your father has had this information for 15 years, then why come forward now? Lena finished the thought. Why risk contact after all this time? Because Danny got sick, Marco said quietly. Because watching you struggle to save your brother from a distance wasn't enough anymore. Because he couldn't stay hidden and watch his children suffer. He pulled out his phone. I'm having my tech team analyze this drive immediately. Whatever's on it, we need to know before anyone else makes a move. He wants to meet with you, Lena said, looking back at the note. Face to face. He wants to negotiate. Marco's jaw tightened, which means he's desperate enough to risk exposure or smart enough to know he needs allies. He looked at Lena directly. The question is whether I can trust him, whether any of this is real or just another play to buy time. He's been writing letters to me for 15 years, Lena said, her voice shaking. He's been helping Danny from the shadows. Whatever else he is, he's not a man who abandoned his family without reason. Read the rest of these letters, see for yourself. Marco held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. We take everything back to my office. We analyze the drive. We read the letters. And then we decide how to respond to your father's request for a meeting. He gestured to his team. Pack everything carefully. I want chain of custody maintained on all of it. The drive back to Manhattan felt surreal. Lena sat in the back seat with the box of her father's letters on her lap, each one a piece of the life she'd thought was lost forever. Marco sat beside her, already on his phone coordinating the analysis of the flash drive, issuing orders in that quiet voice that somehow carried absolute authority. The encryption is commercial grade but outdated, someone was telling him through the phone. We should be able to crack it in a few hours. Make it 1 hour, Marco said. And I want everything analyzed for metadata. When files were created, accessed, modified. I need to know if this information has been sitting untouched for 15 years or if it's been actively maintained. He ended the call and turned to Lena. Are you all right? I don't know. She looked down at the box. I spent 5 years believing my father was dead. 6 months watching my brother die. 3 days trapped in a luxury apartment. And now I'm holding 15 years of letters from a ghost. I have no idea what all right even looks like anymore. Fair enough, Marco's voice softened. For what it's worth, I believe the letters are genuine. A con man wouldn't put that much effort into a long game with no guaranteed payoff. Your father has been watching you, protecting you as best he could from a distance. That suggests he's telling the truth about his reasons for disappearing. But you still don't trust him. I don't trust anyone. Marco's smile was brief and humorless. It's kept me alive this long. They arrived at Marco's building and took the private elevator directly to his penthouse, a space Lena hadn't seen before, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows with a view that made the city look like it belonged to whoever stood in this room. A conference table dominated one end of the space, already set up with computers and monitors. 3 people were waiting, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in nondescript business attire, all watching Lena with carefully neutral expressions. My tech team, Marco said. They've signed NDAs that would bankrupt them if violated. You can speak freely. The woman stepped forward and accepted the flash drive from Marco. We'll have preliminary results in 30 minutes, full analysis in 2 hours. She glanced at Lena. If there's anything specific you want us to look for, I want to know if my father was telling the truth, Lena said. I want to know if the information on that drive is what he says it is. We'll know soon. The woman disappeared into an adjacent office with her team, leaving Lena and Marco alone in the massive space. Read the letters, Marco said, gesturing to a comfortable chair by the windows. Take your time. I need to make some calls, but I want to know what else your father said. Anything that might tell us who he's been running from all these years. Lena settled into the chair with the box and began reading chronologically. The letters painted a picture of a man living in self-imposed exile, moving constantly, working odd jobs under false names, always watching from a distance. Her father had been in the hospital parking lot the night Danny was born. He'd been in the back of the church when their mother was buried. He'd been close enough to see Lena graduate high school, but too far away to congratulate her. Each letter was filled with apologies and explanations, with details about the life he'd lived in hiding and the sacrifices he'd made to keep his family safe. He wrote about missing birthdays and holidays, about the agony of watching his children grow up through stolen glimpses and surveillance photos. He wrote about the people hunting him, never naming them directly, but describing them as powerful enough to reach anywhere, corrupt enough to use any means necessary. And he wrote about his plan, how he'd been gathering additional evidence over the years, building a case that could take down the people who'd forced him into hiding, how he'd been waiting for the right moment to use it, the right leverage to negotiate his family's safety, how Danny's illness had forced his hand because he couldn't watch his son die while holding cards he could play. He's been planning this for years, Lena said aloud, not sure if Marco was even listening. Everything, the evidence gathering, the waiting, the interventions in Danny's care, it was all building toward this moment. Marco appeared in her peripheral vision, his phone finally silent. What moment? The moment when he had enough leverage to negotiate and enough desperation to risk it. Lena looked up at him. My father isn't asking for a meeting because he's desperate. He's asking because he finally has something worth trading. Information that can protect us all, if we're willing to work together. Or destroy us all if we're not, Marco added. Information is only leverage if you're the only one holding it. The moment your father shares what's on that drive, he loses his insurance policy. Which is why he wants to meet face to face, to negotiate terms before revealing everything. Lena set down the letters. He's not stupid, Marco. Ruthless people don't survive 15 years in hiding by being stupid. Marco's expression suggested he was reconsidering his assessment of Richard Carter. Before he could respond, the woman from the tech team emerged from the office, her face pale. You need to see this, she said. They followed her into the office where monitors displayed what appeared to be spreadsheets, audio files, and scanned documents. The woman pulled up a file directory showing thousands of entries organized by date and category. The drive contains 15 years of data, she began. But it's not just what he took originally. He's been actively updating it, adding new information, cross-referencing sources, building what amounts to a comprehensive database of organized crime activity, political corruption, and financial malfeasance across the eastern seaboard. She pulled up a document that made Marco's entire body go rigid. It was a spreadsheet listing names, dates, and dollar amounts. But it wasn't Marco's organization being documented. It was law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, each entry meticulously detailed with dates of payoffs, sources of funds, and corresponding favors granted. This is why they wanted him dead, Marco said quietly, his eyes scanning the list. He didn't just take information about my operations. He took proof that half the justice system is compromised. There's more, the tech woman said, pulling up audio files. Recorded conversations. Some are 15 years old, but others... She played a file dated 6 months ago. 2 voices, distorted slightly, but audible. The first voice was cold and authoritative. The Carter girl is working at that club in Manhattan. Eclipse, I think. DeLuca's place. The second voice responded. You want us to move on her? Not yet. If Richard is watching his kids like we think, he'll reveal himself eventually. We wait. We watch. And when he surfaces, we take them all out, the whole family. Clean sweep. The recording ended. Lena felt ice flooding her veins. That was 6 months ago, she whispered, right when Danny got sick. Right when your father started actively intervening, Marco added, his expression murderous. He knew they were closing in. He knew they'd identified you as leverage, so he started making moves that would force a confrontation before they could act. Who are they? Lena demanded. You recognize that first voice. I could see it on your face. Marco's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. District Attorney Thomas Brennan. He's been in office for 12 years. Reputation for being tough on organized crime, zero tolerance for corruption. His laugh was bitter. Apparently that's because he's the one orchestrating most of it. He takes money to make cases disappear, to bury evidence, to redirect investigations. And my father has proof of all of it. Enough proof to send Brennan and 24 others to prison for the rest of their lives. Marco turned to his tech team. I want every file on this drive copied to our secure servers. I want backups made and stored in 3 separate locations. And I want transcripts of every audio file within the hour. Already on it, the woman confirmed. Marco grabbed Lena's arm gently but firmly. We need to move you. Now. If Brennan knows you're connected to me, if he has any idea your father is making contact... The windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and noise. Lena felt Marco tackle her to the ground. his body covering hers as bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing. The tech team dove for cover, and somewhere an alarm began shrieking. More gunfire, this time from inside the building. Marco's security returning fire. "Stay down," Marco growled in her ear, already pulling a weapon from somewhere Lena hadn't seen. "Don't move, don't speak, don't do anything until I tell you." He rose into a crouch and moved toward the shattered windows with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this before. Lena stayed pressed against the floor, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She could hear shouting, more gunfire, and then Marco's voice cutting through the chaos. "All teams, we have active shooters in the adjacent building, eastern exposure. Suppressing fire and evacuate the primary to the safe room. Now!" Hands grabbed Lena. Anthony, she realized, his face grim, and hauled her toward a section of wall that swung open to reveal a reinforced door. He pushed her inside what looked like a small bunker, concrete walls and filtered air and monitors showing security camera feeds. "Stay here," Anthony ordered. "Door locks from inside. Don't open it for anyone except Mr. DeLuca or me." Then he was gone, the door slamming shut with a hydraulic hiss. Lena was alone in the safe room, watching the monitors as Marco's security team engaged with shooters positioned in the building across the street. She could see muzzle flashes, see Marco directing his people with hand signals, see bodies moving with tactical precision through rooms she'd been standing in moments ago. The assault lasted maybe 5 minutes, but felt like hours. Eventually, the gunfire stopped. On the monitors, Lena watched Marco's team sweep the building, watched them check the tech team for injuries, watched them begin securing the perimeter. Then Marco appeared on the monitor showing the hallway outside the safe room. His clothes were torn, blood on his sleeve, his or someone else's, Lena couldn't tell. He looked directly at the camera. "Lena, it's over. Open the door." She did, and he stepped inside, immediately checking her for injuries with quick, efficient movements. "Are you hurt?" "No, you're bleeding." "It's nothing." He pulled out his phone, already issuing more orders. "We have 3 shooters down, 1 in custody, professional hit squad, probably hired through intermediaries so they couldn't be traced back to Brennan directly." He looked at her, something fierce and protective burning in his dark eyes. "They knew you were here. They knew exactly where to aim." "How?" "Because your father's request for a meeting wasn't just sent to me." Marco's voice was grim. "He sent it to Brennan too. Leverage works both ways. If Brennan knows Richard is willing to deal, he knows Richard is vulnerable. And the fastest way to make Richard vulnerable is to eliminate his children." Lena's legs gave out. She sank onto the bench built into the safe room wall, the full reality crashing down. "Danny, if they know about me, they know about Danny." "I have a full security team at the hospital," Marco said immediately. "Danny is in a private room on a locked floor with armed guards at every entrance. He's safe." "For how long?" "Marco, these people just sent a hit squad after us in broad daylight. They're not going to stop." "No, they're not." Marco crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Which is why we're going to do exactly what your father suggested. We're going to meet with him. We're going to combine resources. And we're going to end this before anyone else tries to kill you." "End it how?" "By giving Brennan and everyone connected to him exactly what they deserve." Marco's smile was cold and sharp. "Your father has spent 15 years gathering evidence. I've spent 15 years building power in this city. Together, we have everything we need to burn their entire operation to the ground. And if my father won't cooperate, if he wants to negotiate instead of fight, then I'll make him understand that negotiation time is over." Marco stood, offering her his hand. "The moment they shot at you, this stopped being about stolen information or old betrayals. It became about survival. Your father knows that. He's been surviving for 15 years. Now we just need to convince him that survival is better done together." Lena took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Through the open safe room door, she could see the destroyed penthouse, glass and bullet holes, and the evidence of violence that had come within inches of ending her life. She thought about her father's letters, about 15 years of watching from shadows and running from consequences. She thought about Danny fighting cancer in a hospital room while armed guards stood watch. She thought about her mother, who died keeping secrets to protect her children. And she thought about Marco, who'd promised her protection and was keeping that promise even as it put him in the crosshairs alongside her. "When do we meet my father?" she asked. "As soon as he makes contact again, which, if he's been watching like I think he has, should be very soon." Marco gestured toward the monitors. He'll have seen the attack. He'll know they're escalating, and he'll know that his window for negotiation is closing fast. As if summoned by Marco's words, one of the security team appeared in the doorway. "Sir, we just intercepted a message. Coded drop at a location in Brooklyn. The signature matches the protocol from the storage facility." Marco's expression sharpened. "What does it say?" "Just a time and place. Tonight, midnight, Pier 42. The guard handed Marco a printed slip of paper. "And a name, Lena Carter. He'll only meet if she's there." Lena felt Marco's hand tighten on hers almost imperceptibly. "Then that's where we'll be," Marco said. "Both of us." The hours between the attack and midnight stretched like wire pulled to breaking point. Marco's people swept the penthouse for additional threats, removed the bodies, and replaced the shattered windows with temporary boards that blocked out the city lights and made the space feel like a tomb. Lena sat in the safe room for most of it, watching the monitors as Marco coordinated responses she didn't fully understand, moving assets, calling in favors, building what looked like preparation for war. At 8 p.m., he brought her food she couldn't eat and sat across from her in the cramped space. "I need you to understand what we're walking into tonight," he said without preamble. "Your father chose Pier 42 because it's isolated, industrial, and has multiple escape routes. It's a smart choice for someone who's been running for 15 years, but it's also exposed, which makes it dangerous for us." "You think it's a trap," Lena said. "I think your father is desperate, which makes him unpredictable. I think Brennan's people are actively hunting all of us, which means they could be watching that pier. And I think the moment the three of us are in the same location, we become a target worth any risk." Marco's dark eyes held hers steadily. "I'm bringing a full security team. Snipers on adjacent buildings, drivers positioned for rapid extraction, counter-surveillance to detect anyone watching. But Lena, if this goes wrong, if shooting starts, I need you to follow my lead without question. Can you do that?" "You're asking if I trust you." "I'm asking if you'll listen when I tell you to run." His voice softened slightly. "Your father and I can handle ourselves. You're the variable that could get us all killed if you freeze or hesitate." Lena wanted to be offended, but he was right. She'd never been shot at before this afternoon. She'd never watched windows explode inward or felt bullets tear through space she'd occupied seconds before. The closest she'd come to violence was breaking up drunk customers at Eclipse, and even that had terrified her. "I'll listen," she promised. "I won't freeze." "Good." Marco stood, offering his hand. "We leave in 3 hours. Try to rest." But rest was impossible. Lena spent the time in the apartment Marco had given her, pacing and thinking about her father. She tried to imagine what he looked like now. The photographs in the storage unit had been 15 years old, showing a man in his 30s with dark hair and an easy smile. Would she even recognize him? Would he recognize her as anything more than the 12-year-old girl he'd left behind? At 11 p.m., Marco knocked on her door dressed in black tactical gear that made him look like he belonged in a military operation rather than a business empire. He carried a Kevlar vest sized for her and helped her strap it on without comment. "It won't stop a headshot," he said matter-of-factly, "but it might save your life if someone aims for center mass. Keep it on the entire time, no matter how uncomfortable." The drive to Brooklyn was silent except for the constant low murmur of Marco coordinating with his team through an earpiece. Lena sat beside him in the back seat, her hands clenched in her lap, trying to control the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Somewhere ahead, her father was waiting. Somewhere behind, Brennan's people might be following. And somewhere in the intersection of those possibilities was a confrontation that could end with any of them dead. Pier 42 emerged from the darkness like a skeleton, rusted metal framework and rotting wood, the remnants of New York's industrial past slowly being reclaimed by the river. The car stopped a block away, and Marco's team spread out immediately, shadows moving with practiced precision through the abandoned structures. Marco waited until they signaled all clear before opening the door. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. "Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if I say run, you run toward the car and don't look back. Anthony will extract you." Lena nodded, her throat too tight for words. They walked toward the pier, their footsteps echoing on broken concrete. The river smell was strong here, salt and oil and decay. Lena could see the Manhattan skyline across the water, a wall of light that made this side feel even darker by contrast. Marco's hand rested casually near his weapon. and Lena realized with a shock that he expected to use it, a figure detached from the shadows near the end of the pier. "That's far enough, DeLuca." The voice was older than Lena remembered, roughened by years and stress, but unmistakable. Her father's voice, the voice that had read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike and told her he loved her every single day until the day he disappeared. Marco stopped walking, his hand moving slightly toward his weapon. "Richard Carter. It's been a long time. Not long enough, apparently." Her father stepped into the dim light cast by a distant street lamp, and Lena's breath caught. He was older, harder, the easy smile replaced by deep lines of worry and exhaustion. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and he moved with the cautious precision of someone who'd spent too long looking over his shoulder. But his eyes, when they found Lena standing behind Marco, his eyes were exactly as she remembered. Dark brown, warm despite everything, and filled with so much pain that Lena felt it like a physical blow. "Lena," he breathed, and his voice broke on her name. She wanted to run to him, wanted to demand answers and scream accusations and collapse into his arms like she was 12 years old again and none of this nightmare had happened. But Marco's hand came up in a subtle gesture that meant stay, and Lena forced herself to remain still. "You wanted this meeting," Marco said, his tone neutral. "Make it worth the risk." Richard's attention snapped back to Marco, and something cold entered his expression. "You've kept my daughter safe. I appreciate that. But let's not pretend this is about generosity. You want what I took. You want your revenge. And you're using Lena as leverage exactly the way I knew you would." "I'm using her as protection," Marco corrected. "The moment I publicly connected myself to Lena, I made her a target for my enemies. But I also made her untouchable to anyone who values their life. You, on the other hand, left her to struggle alone for 5 years while you played spy games with information that's made all of us targets." "I left her to keep her alive," Richard snapped. "Everything I did, every choice I made was to protect my children from people like Brennan who would use them as leverage against me." "And yet, here we are," Marco said coldly. "Your son is dying in a hospital under armed guard. Your daughter just survived an assassination attempt. And you're standing on a pier in the middle of the night asking for what? Forgiveness? Alliance? Or are you just here to negotiate the terms of your surrender?" "I'm here to offer you the one thing you've wanted for 15 years, Richard said, pulling a second flash drive from his pocket. "Everything on the original drive you think I stole, plus 15 years of additional evidence. Names, dates, recordings, financial transactions. Enough to destroy Brennan and everyone connected to him. Enough to clear your name of half the crimes they've been trying to pin on you, and enough to buy my family's safety permanently." Marco's expression didn't change, but Lena saw the subtle shift in his posture. "In exchange for what?" "My children's complete protection, medical care for Danny, guaranteed and permanent, relocation for Lena somewhere safe with a new identity if necessary. And for me," Richard's voice hardened, "I want out, clean out. New identity, new country, enough money to disappear properly this time. You get the information, we get to live." "No," Lena said, and both men turned to stare at her. She stepped out from behind Marco, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "No, I'm not running, I'm not hiding, and I'm not letting you disappear again." "Lena," her father started, but she cut him off. "You don't get to make decisions for me anymore. You lost that right when you let me believe you were dead for 12 years. The words came out sharp and bitter, carrying all the grief and rage she'd been suppressing since she'd first seen his handwriting on that box. "I read your letters, every single one. And you know what I learned? That you've been watching us suffer from a distance, congratulating yourself for keeping us safe, while Mom worked herself to death and Danny got sick and I sold everything we had trying to keep us afloat." "I was protecting you," Richard said, his voice raw. "Everything Brennan touched turned to ash. Everyone he targeted ended up dead or destroyed. I couldn't let that happen to you." "So instead you let it happen slowly," Lena shot back. "You let us drown in medical bills and grief and fear while you played the long game with your evidence and your plans. Well, guess what, Dad? I'm done drowning, I'm done running, and I'm done being protected by men who think they know better than I do what I can handle." She turned to Marco. "You asked me earlier if I trusted you. The answer is yes, but not because you've been honest or kind. I trust you because you've been direct. You told me the cost up front, You showed me exactly what I was trading when I agreed to help you. My father, she gestured at Richard, my father has been lying to me for 15 years about costs I didn't even know I was paying. Lena, please, Richard said, and there were tears in his eyes now. I know I hurt you. I know I made choices that cost us all too much. But I did it because I love you, because the thought of Brennan getting his hands on you. Then stop hiding, Lena interrupted. Stop running. Help us end this properly so that Danny and I can actually have lives instead of just survival. You said you have enough evidence to destroy Brennan. Then let's destroy him. But we do it together, and we do it in a way that doesn't require any of us to disappear. Richard looked at Marco. She doesn't understand what she's asking. Taking down Brennan means going to war with half the justice system. It means exposure, trials, media attention. It means painting a target on her back that will never completely go away. She understands better than you think, Marco said, his voice carrying an edge of respect that surprised Lena. Your daughter has been making impossible choices for years while you watched from the shadows. Don't insult her intelligence by pretending she doesn't know the risks. I'm standing right here, Lena said sharply. Stop talking about me like I'm not. And Dad, if you actually want to protect me, then trust me to make my own choices. Trust that I'm not 12 anymore. Trust that I can handle the truth and the consequences. Richard stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or grief for the child she'd been versus the woman she'd become. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. You sound like your mother. Mom did what she had to do to keep us safe, Lena said. Now I'm doing the same thing. The difference is, I'm not doing it alone. The sound of car engines in the distance made all three of them freeze. Marco's hand went to his earpiece, listening to something Lena couldn't hear, and his expression turned murderous. We have incoming, he said quietly. 3 vehicles blocking both exits. Professional formation. Brennan's people. He looked at Richard. You were followed. Impossible, Richard said, but his face had gone pale. I swept for surveillance. I used counters. They didn't follow you, Marco interrupted. They followed us. Or they've been watching this pier since your message dropped. Either way, we're about to have company. He pulled his weapon and spoke into his earpiece. All teams, defensive positions. Priority is civilian protection. Engage only on my signal. Lena felt her father's hand close around her arm, pulling her toward the edge of the pier. There's a boat, 20 yards east. I have it staged for exactly this scenario. She's not running, Marco said flatly. Neither are you. We end this tonight. You're insane, Richard hissed. Brennan sent a hit squad. We're outnumbered and exposed. We're prepared and we have the high ground. My people are already in position. Marco's smile was cold. And unlike you, I don't run from fights I can win. The vehicles screeched to a stop at the pier entrance, doors opening to disgorge armed figures. Lena counted at least 8, probably more in the shadows. Her father started to move toward the water, but Marco's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder. You run now. They hunt you forever. You hunt them with me. This ends tonight. Marco's eyes were hard. Choose, Carter. Be a ghost or be a father. You don't get both. Richard looked at Lena, then at the approaching figures, then back at Marco. Something resolute settled over his features. I need a weapon. Marco pulled a second gun from somewhere and handed it over. Stay behind me. Protect your daughter. Don't make me regret trusting you. Same to you, Richard said, checking the weapon with practiced ease that surprised Lena. The first shot cracked across the pier, and Marco shoved both Lena and her father down behind a concrete barrier. Return fire came from Marco's hidden team, and suddenly the pier erupted into chaos. Lena pressed herself against the cold concrete, her father's body covering hers protectively, while Marco coordinated his people with calm precision. Suppressing fire on the left flank, Marco said into his earpiece. Driver team, prepare for extraction if needed. Snipers, I need confirmation on hostile count. More gunfire. Someone screamed. Lena heard her father's breath harsh in her ear, felt his heart hammering against her shoulder blade. He'd thrown himself over her instinctively, the way he probably had when she was small and needed protection from nightmares instead of bullets. Lena, he whispered urgently, when I move, you run for the water. There's a ladder on the east side, boat waiting below. You get in that boat and you go. I told you, Lena said through gritted teeth. I'm not running. You're my daughter. You'll do what I tell you. I'm a grown woman who makes her own choices, Lena interrupted. So you can either accept that or get off me and help Marco end this. Richard made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You really are like your mother. He shifted position, and Lena saw him take aim around the barrier. His first shot took down one of the approaching figures. His second made another dive for cover. Marco glanced at him with something that might have been approval. Not bad for someone who's been hiding for 15 years. I wasn't hiding, Richard said, firing again. I was preparing. The firefight intensified, but Lena could feel the tide turning. Marco's people were better positioned, better trained, and fighting with the confidence of a team that had worked together before. The hostile forces were being picked off systematically, driven back toward their vehicles. One of the cars exploded. Whether from a hit to the gas tank or something more deliberate, Lena couldn't tell. Then a voice cut through the chaos, amplified by a megaphone. DeLuca! Carter! I know you're both here, and I know you have something that belongs to me. Marco's expression went cold. Brennan. He came himself. Which means he's desperate, Richard said. Desperate enough to risk personal exposure. Or confident enough to think he can kill us all and bury the evidence. Marco spoke into his earpiece. Confirm location on the voice. I want eyes on Brennan now. He's behind the center vehicle, someone responded in Marco's ear, loud enough that Lena could hear. Surrounded by at least 4 bodyguards. No clear shot. Marco stood slowly, weapon lowered but ready, and stepped out from behind the barrier. Brennan, this is a bold move, even for you. The district attorney emerged from behind the vehicle, and even from a distance, Lena could see he was everything her father's recordings had suggested, polished, confident, and completely without conscience. He wore an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marco DeLuca, I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people would have handed over Richard Carter by now to save themselves, but you always did have a stubborn streak. Brennan's voice carried easily across the pier. Unfortunately, that stubbornness is about to cost you everything. You and Carter and that girl you've been parading around, you're all loose ends, and I've built my career on tying up loose ends. You've built your career on corruption and murder, Marco corrected. And we have proof of every single crime. 15 years of evidence that will destroy you and everyone you've protected. Evidence only matters if someone lives to present it. Brennan gestured, and his remaining people shifted positions, weapons raised. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over every copy of whatever Carter gave you. You're going to let my people confirm it's destroyed, and then you're going to walk away and never speak of this again. And if we refuse, then I kill you all right here and spend the next 15 years sleeping peacefully knowing the only people who could hurt me are dead. Brennan's smile widened. I'm a district attorney, DeLuca. I'll make this disappear by morning. Self-defense. You drew weapons on law enforcement. Tragic, but necessary. Except we're not the only ones with the evidence, Richard called out, standing beside Marco. His voice was steady, carrying 15 years of preparation. I made copies. Multiple copies. Stored in locations you'll never find, with instructions to release everything if I don't check in every 72 hours. Kill us, and you guarantee your own destruction. Brennan's confidence flickered. You're bluffing. Am I? Richard pulled out his phone with his free hand. I can prove it. Give me 2 minutes and I'll show you exactly how much insurance I bought with 15 years of paranoia. He tapped the screen, and somewhere, probably everywhere, data started moving. Lena watched her father's face and saw not fear, but grim satisfaction. This was what he'd been planning, what he'd been building toward. Not just evidence, but a dead man's switch, automated and distributed, designed to destroy Brennan even from beyond the grave. You're insane, Brennan said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I'm a father, Richard corrected, and you threaten my children. Did you really think I wouldn't have a contingency plan? Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted, surprise, then something like respect. He's telling the truth. Files just hit the cloud, encrypted, distributed across multiple servers, timed release unless countermanded. Brennan, you just lost. I could still kill you all, and trigger the release immediately, Marco interrupted. Carter's system is set up to detect his biometrics. If his heart stops, the encryption keys release automatically. You pull that trigger, and every news outlet in the country has your dirty laundry by morning. He smiled, cold and sharp. "You're done, Brennan. The only question now is whether you go down fighting or whether you surrender peacefully and hope for a plea deal." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of sirens in the distance. Real sirens, not Brennan's people, but actual law enforcement responding to reports of gunfire. Marco must have called them, Lena realized. Probably the moment he'd confirmed Brennan was present. Actual honest police, the ones Brennan hadn't corrupted, coming to find their district attorney at the scene of a shootout. Brennan's face went from confident to panicked in the space of a heartbeat. He looked at his people, at Marco's superior position, at the approaching sirens, and made the calculation that he was trapped. "This isn't over," he said, but it sounded like desperation. "Yes, it is," Marco replied. "Drop your weapons. Tell your people to stand down. And maybe, you live long enough to see trial." For a moment, Lena thought Brennan might refuse. Thought he might go down fighting out of pride or stupidity or the kind of arrogance that got powerful men killed. But survival instinct won out. He gestured to his people, and weapons lowered reluctantly. Marco's team moved in immediately, securing the hostiles with efficient brutality. The police arrived 3 minutes later to find Marco DeLuca and Richard Carter standing over a district attorney and 8 armed men, all surrounded by evidence of a firefight and a story that would dominate headlines for months. The lead detective took one look at the scene and reached for his radio. "We're going to need a lot more units. And somebody call the FBI." This just became federal. In the chaos that followed, statements given, evidence collected, Brennan and his people arrested, Lena found herself sitting on the edge of the pier with her father beside her. Marco was 50 feet away coordinating with law enforcement, his voice calm as he explained exactly what had happened and why. He'd make this work, Lena knew. He'd turn this disaster into a victory, position himself as the victim instead of the criminal, and probably come out of it more powerful than before. "I'm sorry," her father said quietly, "for all of it, for leaving, for lying, for the choices I made that hurt you." Lena looked at him, this stranger who was her father, this ghost who'd come back to life. "I don't forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I understand why you did it, and I'm glad you're alive." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably." Lena leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion crashing over her. "But you're going to have to earn the rest. You're going to have to be here. Actually here, not watching from shadows. Danny needs to meet you. I need to know you, and you need to figure out how to be a father instead of a ghost." "I don't know if I remember how," Richard admitted. "Then learn." Lena closed her eyes. "We'll both learn together." Marco appeared beside them, his expression unreadable. "The FBI wants to talk to all of us. Richard, they're offering protective custody in exchange for testimony, full immunity if you cooperate." "What about my kids?" Richard asked immediately. "Protected. Danny stays in treatment under federal supervision until he's in remission. Lena," Marco looked at her directly. "The FBI is willing to provide security, but I told them you're already under my protection. That doesn't change unless you want it to." Lena met his eyes and saw the question there. Not about safety or strategy, but about choice. He was giving her the option to walk away from his world, to take the federal protection and disappear into witness security if she wanted. All she had to do was say the word. "I stay with you," she said, "but on my terms. No more decisions made for me. No more cages, even gilded ones." Marco's smile was genuine this time, almost warm. "Fair enough." Richard looked between them, and something complicated crossed his face. "DeLuca, if you hurt her, you'll kill me yourself," Marco finished. "Yes, I've heard that threat from her brother already. It's becoming a family tradition." He extended his hand to Richard. "For what it's worth, your daughter is stronger than either of us gave her credit for. She doesn't need our protection as much as she needs our respect." Richard shook his hand slowly. "Take care of her anyway." "Always," Marco said, and the promise in that single word made Lena's heart skip. The night ended with federal agents, evidence collection, and the beginning of what would become the biggest corruption scandal in New York history. But for Lena, sitting between her father and the man who'd pulled her from invisibility into the light, It felt less like an ending and more like the first real beginning she'd had in years. The federal investigation moved with surprising speed once the evidence Richard had compiled began hitting desks at the FBI field office. Within 72 hours, 18 arrest warrants were issued. Within a week, 3 judges had recused themselves from cases, 2 police chiefs had resigned, and Brennan himself was being held without bail pending trial for conspiracy, murder for hire, racketeering, and a list of other charges that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Lena watched it unfold from the relative safety of Marco's building, which had transformed from a cage into something closer to a command center. Her father had been moved into a secure federal facility for debriefing, but he called every evening at 7, and they talked for an hour about nothing and everything. 15 years of missed conversations compressed into careful exchanges that hurt as much as they healed. Danny's transplant was scheduled for 3 weeks out, the donor match confirmed, and the preparation protocol proceeding exactly as Dr. Chen had promised. Lena visited him every day with Marco's security detail trailing like professional shadows, and each time she saw her brother looking stronger, more hopeful, more alive. He'd met their father twice now, awkward reunions full of tears and anger and tentative forgiveness. The road ahead was long, but at least they were all walking it together instead of separately. Marco himself had become something Lena couldn't quite define. He was still dangerous, still powerful, still the kind of man who could command a room with a glance. But in the quiet moments between crisis management and federal testimonies, she caught glimpses of someone different. Someone who brought her coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked. Someone who sat with her in silence when the weight of everything became too much. Someone who looked at her not as property or protection, but as an equal. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 2 weeks after the pier, Marco knocked on her apartment door at 8 in the morning with an expression that made her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong, but we need to talk." He gestured to the living room. "May I?" Lena nodded, and they sat facing each other on the couch that had become familiar through repetition. Marco looked tired, not physically exhausted, but carrying the kind of weariness that came from making difficult decisions. "The FBI has offered me a deal," he said without preamble. "Full immunity for testimony against Brennan and the network of corruption your father's evidence exposed. In exchange, I provide detailed information about how my operations intersected with theirs. Which cases were influenced, which payments were made, which favors were traded." "That's good, isn't it?" Lena asked carefully. "It means I cooperate with law enforcement in ways I've never done before. It means exposing parts of my organization that I've kept carefully hidden. It means—" Marco paused, choosing his words. "It means reinventing myself from someone who operates in shadows to someone who operates in daylight. A different kind of power, a different kind of business." "And you're worried about what that means for you," Lena said, understanding dawning. "You've built everything on being untouchable, unknowable. This makes you visible." "Vulnerable," Marco corrected, "but also, potentially, legitimate. The FBI has suggested that someone with my resources and connections could be valuable in rebuilding the systems Brennan corrupted. Oversight positions, advisory roles. Ways to use what I know to actually fix things, instead of just profiting from their dysfunction." Lena studied his face, looking for the trap or the calculation. "What do you want to do?" "That depends on you," Marco said quietly. "On me?" "Marco, this is your life, your organization, and you're part of that now," he interrupted. "Whether we intended it or not, we're connected. The dance at Eclipse, the investigation, the media coverage, everyone in this city knows your face and knows it's connected to mine. So before I make a decision that affects both our futures, I need to know what you want, Lena. Do you want to stay in this world? Do you want to build something here? Or do you want me to arrange for you to disappear quietly into witness protection and live a normal life somewhere far away from all of this?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Lena looked out the window at the city spreading below, the city that had been her home and her prison and her battlefield all at once. She thought about Eclipse, where she'd been invisible. She thought about the coffee shop where she'd worked herself to exhaustion for minimum wage. She thought about the small apartment with its 4 locks and constant fear. And she thought about the woman she'd become in the past 3 weeks, the woman who'd survived assassination attempts and confronted her father and stood her ground against men who thought power gave them the right to make her choices for her. I don't want normal, she said finally. I don't think I ever did. I just wanted to survive. And survival looked like invisibility. But I'm not invisible anymore. And I don't want to be. Marco's expression shifted. Relief maybe, or something deeper that he quickly shuddered. That's not a small decision. Staying in my world means accepting that danger is always a possibility. It means living with security details and media attention and people making assumptions about who you are based on who you're connected to. I know. Lena turned back to face him fully. But it also means having resources to actually help Danny, to rebuild a relationship with my father, to maybe make something of myself beyond just surviving day to day. And it means... She hesitated, then pushed forward. It means figuring out what this is between us. Because we both know it's not just protection anymore. The silence stretched for a heartbeat too long. Then Marco reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and solid and steady. No, he agreed quietly. It hasn't been just protection for a while now. Since when? Lena asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Marco considered the question seriously. Since the hospital, when you demanded to see Danny before agreeing to anything else. Most people in your position would have taken the money and run. You took the risk and fought. That's when I realized you weren't just a means to an end. You were someone worth... He paused, and Lena saw vulnerability flash across his features. Someone worth knowing. I thought I was just leverage, Lena said softly. You were. Initially. Marco's honesty was brutal and refreshing. But leverage becomes complicated when you start respecting the person you're using. And respect becomes something else entirely when that person proves to be stronger than you expected. What does it become? Lena asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Marco's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. That depends on what you want it to be. Lena looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd pulled her from invisibility and offered her a different kind of life. He was dangerous and complicated and scarred by years of operating in moral gray areas. He'd used her, protected her, respected her, and somewhere along the way started looking at her like she mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with her father or strategy or business. I want honesty, she said finally. I want partnership, not ownership. I want to build something that isn't based on desperation or survival, and I want... She met his eyes directly. I want to see if what we feel is real or just adrenaline and proximity. Fair terms, Marco agreed. I can work with that. Can you? Lena challenged. Can you actually partner with someone instead of controlling them? Can you let me make my own choices even when you think you know better? Can you trust me the way you're asking me to trust you? Marco was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. I don't know, he admitted. I've spent 20 years building control over every aspect of my life. Trusting people has gotten me betrayed more often than not. But, he squeezed her hand, I'm willing to try. If you're willing to be patient while I learn. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise of forever. But it was honest and real, and more than Lena had expected from a man who dealt in power and calculations. Okay, she said. We try. The kiss that followed was inevitable and perfect, and carried the weight of everything they'd survived to reach this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Marco was smiling, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face into something almost boyish. I'm taking the FBI's deal, he said. I'm going legitimate, or as legitimate as someone like me can get. It won't happen overnight, and there will be complications. But I think I'm tired of operating in shadows. I think I want to build something that doesn't require constant defense. What will that look like? Lena asked. Security consulting, probably. Risk assessment. Using my network to help corporations and governments identify vulnerabilities before they become disasters. It's still power, still influence, but channeled differently. Marco stood, pulling her up with him. And it means I can offer you something beyond just protection. Partnership in the business, if you want it. A real role, with real responsibilities. I don't know anything about security consulting, Lena said, surprised. You know about surviving in impossible situations. You know about reading people and making strategic decisions under pressure. That's more valuable than any formal training. Marco's expression was serious. I'm not offering you this as charity, Lena. I'm offering it because I think you'd be good at it. and because I'd rather build this new version of my life with you than without you. Lena felt something unlock in her chest, a possibility she hadn't let herself consider, a future that wasn't just survival, but actual growth. I'll think about it, she said, because rushing into life-changing decisions had gotten her into enough trouble already. Take your time, Marco said. We have nothing but time now. Danny's transplant happened on a cold Tuesday in November, and the waiting room on the transplant floor became a strange gathering of the people who'd fought their way through the past month together. Lena sat between her father and Marco, three people who'd been enemies and strangers and were now something close to family. Anthony brought coffee. Dr. Chen provided updates every hour. And slowly, painfully, the surgery progressed toward success. Richard had aged another year in the past weeks, the stress of testimony and revelation etched into new lines around his eyes. But he'd also started to relax in small ways, smiling more easily, touching Lena's shoulder without the weight of 15 years of absence making the gesture awkward. He was learning to be a father again, and Lena was learning to let him. He's going to be okay, Richard said for the third time, as much to convince himself as anyone else. Yes, Lena agreed firmly. He is. When Dr. Chen finally emerged 8 hours later with the news that the transplant had been successful and Danny was in recovery, Lena felt something inside her finally release. The fear that had been her constant companion for 6 months, the grinding terror of watching her brother die. It lifted like fog burning off in sunlight. Can I see him? She asked, already standing. He'll be unconscious for several more hours, but yes, one visitor at a time once he's stable. Doctor. Chen smiled with genuine warmth. Miss Carter, your brother is young and strong. His prognosis is excellent. We'll monitor him closely for the next few weeks, but I'm optimistic that he'll make a full recovery. Lena excused herself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes straight. Grief and relief and joy all tangled together in a release that left her shaking. When she finally emerged, Marco was waiting in the hallway with tissues and understanding. He's going to live, Lena said unnecessarily. Yes, Marco agreed, pulling her into a hug that felt more natural than it had any right to. He is. They stood like that for a long moment, and Lana felt the last of her armor finally crack open. She'd been so strong for so long, carrying so much weight alone, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had her father back, however complicated that relationship remained. She had Danny fighting his way toward health, and she had Marco, this unexpected partner who'd started as an enemy and become something she still didn't have words for. Over the following weeks, as Danny recovered and grew stronger, Lena began building the framework of her new life. She accepted Marco's offer to join his security consulting firm in a junior analyst role, learning the business from the ground up rather than being given authority she hadn't earned. The work was challenging and sometimes frightening, analyzing threats and vulnerabilities for clients who paid enormous sums to prevent disasters. But it was also engaging in ways Lena had never experienced, using her mind and instincts in ways that waiting tables never had. Her father had taken a position with the FBI as a consultant, his 15 years of compiled evidence making him invaluable in untangling the remaining threads of Brennan's corruption network. He'd found an apartment in Queens and was slowly, carefully, trying to rebuild the parts of his life that hiding had cost him. He and Lena had dinner every Sunday, awkward meals that gradually became less painful as they learned each other again. The media eventually moved on to other scandals, though Lena's face occasionally still appeared in society pages photographed beside Marco at charity events or business functions. She learned to smile for cameras and deflect invasive questions with practiced ease. The attention never became comfortable, but it became manageable. 3 months after Danny's transplant, Dr. Chen declared him in remission. The cancer markers were undetectable, his strength was returning, and the worst of the side effects had faded. He'd lost the semester at school, but was already planning to return in the spring, talking about engineering programs and internships with the kind of enthusiasm Lena had feared she'd never hear again. I want to meet her, Danny announced one evening when Lena visited him at the rehabilitation facility where he was completing his recovery. The woman Marco's been seeing, which is you, obviously, but you two keep pretending it's some professional thing. Lena felt her face heat. It is professional, mostly. We're figuring it out. You're together, Danny said flatly. Everyone can see it. You look at him like he hung the moon, and he looks at you like you're the only person in the room. Just admit it already. It's complicated, Lena hedged. Everything worth having is complicated. Danny's expression softened. Lena, you saved my life. You made deals with devils and faced down assassins and rebuilt our entire family from nothing. You're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to want something for yourself instead of just surviving. The wisdom in her little brother's voice made Lena's throat tight. When did you get so smart? I had a lot of time to think while dying, Danny said matter-of-factly. Turns out near-death experiences give you perspective. So take it from me. If Marco makes you happy, stop overthinking it and just be happy. That evening, Lena returned to the penthouse where she'd been spending most of her nights, finding Marco at his desk reviewing contracts. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was private and genuine and meant only for her. Danny's in remission, she announced. I know. Dr. Chen called me this afternoon. Marco stood, closing the distance between them. How are you feeling? Like I can finally breathe, Lena admitted. Like the weight I've been carrying is finally gone. Good. Marco's hand settled on her waist, warm and steady. You've been carrying it far too long. Lena looked up at him, at this man who'd pulled her from invisibility and given her a chance at a life beyond survival. Danny says we should stop pretending we're not together. Danny's perceptive. Marco's smile was slight but real. What do you say? I say, Lena took a breath, choosing honesty over fear. I say, I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to hide what this is or minimize it because it's complicated. I want to try. Actually try, not just figure it out as we go. Trying is good, Marco agreed. I can work with trying. The kiss that followed was less about desperation and more about choice. Two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances deciding to build something deliberate and real. When they finally pulled apart, Lena felt something settle into place that had been shifting and uncertain for months. I love you, she said, surprising herself with the words, but knowing they were true. Marco's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to track before settling on something that looked almost like wonder. I love you too, though I should warn you, I'm not particularly good at it. I'm controlling and paranoid, and I make decisions based on strategy rather than emotion most of the time. I know, Lena said. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to try, to trust me, to build something with me instead of for me. I can do that, Marco promised. It might take practice, but I can do that. 6 months later, Lena stood in the office that used to belong to Eclipse's manager and looked around at the changes. The club had been purchased by one of Marco's subsidiary companies and was being converted into something new, a foundation offering job training and placement services for people trying to rebuild their lives after crisis. The irony wasn't lost on her that the place where she'd been invisible was becoming a place dedicated to making people visible again. What do you think? Marco asked from the doorway, watching her survey the construction. I think it's perfect, Lena said honestly. The space that had represented survival mode was becoming something about hope and second chances. It felt right. Danny appeared behind Marco, looking healthy and strong in ways that still made Lena's heart catch. He'd returned to school, thrown himself into his engineering program, and was thriving with the kind of intensity that only someone who'd faced death could manage. He and their father had developed their own relationship, separate from Lena's, built on Sunday basketball games and long discussions about physics and ethics, and all the conversations they'd missed. Ready? Danny asked. Dad's waiting downstairs. The four of them, Lena, Marco, Danny, and Richard, had started a monthly tradition of dinner together, awkward family meals that were slowly becoming less fraught. It wasn't perfect. Richard still struggled with guilt over the years he'd lost. Marco still had to consciously choose vulnerability over control. Danny still had moments where the trauma of his illness surfaced unexpectedly. And Lena still sometimes woke up expecting to find herself back in her old apartment, drowning in bills and fear. But they were trying. All of them, in their own complicated ways, were trying to build something real from the ashes of everything that had burned. Dinner that night was at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind of place where the owner knew everyone's names and the wine flowed freely. Richard had brought photographs from Lena and Danny's childhood, Pictures their mother had kept hidden, but that he'd recovered from storage. They spent an hour looking through memories, filling in gaps in each other's stories. Mom would have liked this, Danny said quietly, looking at a photo of all 5 of them from when he was barely a year old. Us being together again. She would have, Richard agreed, his voice rough. She spent 5 years protecting you both from my choices. I think she'd be glad to know it wasn't for nothing. That you're both not just surviving, but actually living. Lena looked around the table at her strange, rebuilt family. Her father who'd returned from the dead. Her brother who'd survived cancer. Her partner who'd learned to trust. And herself, the invisible waitress who'd become visible, who'd found strength she hadn't known she possessed, who'd fought for her family and won. To Mom, she said, raising her glass, for keeping us safe long enough to find our way back to each other. They drank to that, and to the future, and to all the impossible things they'd survived to reach this moment. Later that night, back in the penthouse with the city spread out below them, Lena and Marco stood at the windows in comfortable silence. The distance between them had become something chosen rather than imposed, partnership rather than protection. "What are you thinking?" Marco asked. "That a year ago I was working double shifts just to make rent, and now I'm standing in a penthouse planning foundation programs." Lena shook her head. "It doesn't feel real sometimes." It's real," Marco assured her. "You made it real by refusing to stay invisible, by fighting for what mattered." "We fought," Lena corrected. "All of us. Together." "Together," Marco agreed, pulling her close. "I like the sound of that." Lena relaxed into his embrace, feeling safe and seen and valued in ways she'd never imagined possible. The dance that had started at Eclipse, the dance that was supposed to be a declaration of ownership, had transformed into something else entirely. Partnership, choice, love earned rather than claimed. She wasn't Marco's property. She wasn't anyone's to own or control or protect without consent. She was her own person who'd chosen to build a life alongside someone who respected that autonomy, who'd learned to trust her strength, who'd transformed from dangerous stranger to genuine partner. The city lights below glittered like promises, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lena looked at the future and felt hope instead of fear. Danny was healthy, her father was present, her work was meaningful, and the man holding her had proven that power wielded with care could protect rather than control. "I'm glad you danced with me that night," Lena said softly. Marco's laugh was quiet and warm against her hair. "So am I. Though I should probably admit that the moment I saw you trying to navigate that drunk patron, I knew you were different. Something about the way you held yourself, invisible on the surface but steel underneath. I wanted to know what that strength looked like when it stopped hiding." "And now you know," Lena said. "Now I know," Marco agreed. "And I'm grateful every day that you chose to trust me enough to show me." They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But they'd face it as partners, as equals, as 2 people who'd learned that true strength wasn't about control or invisibility, but about the courage to be seen. Somewhere across the city, Brennan sat in a prison cell awaiting trial that would likely end with him dying behind bars. Somewhere, the systems he'd corrupted were slowly being rebuilt by people committed to actual justice. Somewhere, Danny slept peacefully without fear of cancer reclaiming him. And somewhere, Richard Carter looked at old photographs and forgave himself a little more for the choices he'd made in the name of protection. But here, in this moment, Lena simply existed in the arms of someone who'd started as her enemy and become her home. The dance that had marked her as taken had evolved into a commitment freely given. She wasn't claimed by fear or circumstance anymore. She was chosen, and she had chosen back, and that made all the difference.